So yeah, I'm talking about communication tonight, and primarily I'm going to talk about listening. Why? Because I told you earlier this week that listening saved my life, but in the world that we live in that is driven by selfish ambition, we've already mentioned James 3:16 that teaches us that selfish ambition is the root of all kinds of evil. Well, if you think about somebody being selfishly ambitious, do you think about people who are thinking, yeah, man, I can't wait to say this to them, and I want to say this? Or do you think it's more similar to people saying, man, I can't wait to just sit there and listen. I can't wait to go be with them so I can just listen to them talk. I mean, if you're like me, you think, man, we're trained to talk. We're trained so much to talk that people often, instead of listening, they will just sort of be thinking about what they want to say next when the person gets finished speaking. Just raise your hand. Just be honest, man. Come on. Who's done that? Oh, this is the most hands I've gotten all week. This is great. But hey, yeah. So I want to talk about this. And we have this beautiful passage that tells us, some translations even say, this you know, my brethren, but you must be quick to listen or quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. In Ephesians 4, we see that it says to be angry and don't sin. So clearly there's a godly anger, but every emotion we have is a reflection of God and can be used to glorify Satan instead of glorifying God. And that's why we have a command to be angry and yet not sin. But James 1 verse 20 tells us that the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. So, what I want to say is the power of listening. This is the back end of this collection, these two verses here. Remember, there were no verses given by God. This is a complete thought, these two verses in James 1. And so, what this tells us is that if we are quick to listen and slow to speak, I believe that will help us be slow to anger. And I believe we can better avoid the anger of man, which takes us away from the righteousness of God, if we're good listeners and we understand how to listen. So let me just give you a few of the things that will happen when you learn how to be a good listener, the way God teaches us to, and we'll get right into it. 1, you will attract more people in your life. I'll talk about that later on. But 2, you will learn to love people more. Because 3, you will be more understanding of people. The more you listen to people and the more you understand where they're coming from and really put yourself in their shoes, you will start to realize even the people you can't stand just might have their own insecurities, just might have their own emotional struggles that are taking up emotional bandwidth so that they might not have the full capacity to handle stress and challenges, which might make it easier for them to act in ungodly ways, sometimes toward you. And so, listening also, I want to suggest, helps put us in touch with the love of God. And we can help people feel loved. I'm not going to talk about trying to make people feel something. To me, talking that way almost seems manipulative. What I'm telling you is by listening to people, you will love people more. And they will feel your love more. If you love people and they can't tell, who cares? You know? If they don't know that you love them and they can't tell and they don't feel it, something needs to change. And I'm telling you, unequivocally, I know that if we become spiritually affectionate listeners, people will know that we love them. How do I know? because it's part of how God loves us. We talk to God ad nauseum, and he will just listen and listen and listen. And multiple times in the Old and New Testament, there are statements about the way God listens to us. And there are statements about how God is always there for us. So I want to suggest, when we are there for people and we learn to listen, we are becoming more in touch with God and what he goes through every day. In addition, we're learning to love people. So part of the way God, in massive ways, shows his love for us. So what if we could snap our fingers and make us all people that love other people more like God? Isn't that a good thing? Yeah, it's a great thing. This has changed my life, guys. Before we get into any details, I want to just go through a few verses and show you, without a shadow of a doubt, that God wants us to know that he is there to listen to us. Before I read these passages, I just want to share a concept with you. There is an overwhelming theme throughout the Old and New Testament that there's a quote in James 4, verse 6 that I'll just reference to you. And it says that God is opposed to the proud, gives grace to the humble. I'm a humble person. If you're going to God recognizing that he's God and you are not, and that he's everything and that we need him, and that there's a sense of humility in that. And if you acknowledge to him that you're not a humble person, there is a sense of humility in acknowledging your pride. So, if you will, go with me to the book of Psalms, Psalms 18. Psalm 18 is really interesting because it's practically it's like really the same thing that David was praying to God, this song in 2 Samuel chapter 22. I mean, you compare them, it is the same thing. It's just been recorded. The Psalm 18 essentially is the recording of what happened in 2 Samuel chapter 22. So look in Psalm 18, verse 6. This is David after he was escaped from Saul by the Lord's help. In my distress, I called upon the Lord. To my God, I cried for help. From his temple, he heard my voice, and my cry to him reached his ears. It's a beautiful thing, right? I want to show you something really interesting. Go to John chapter 11. As you're going there, I want you to know that God not only listens to us, so think about it. To show you the contrast between God and people. Raise your hand if you've ever had somebody interrupt you and not really want to hear what you have to say because they know what you're going to say. Well, I already knew what you're going to say, whether they knew it or not. How many have been interrupted by somebody who says, yeah, I know what you're going to say? Yeah. That might be the most hands yet all week. So God doesn't do that. While we're in John 11, I want to read you another psalm. Psalm 139, verse 4 tells us that even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. That tells us, even though God knows what we're going to say before it's even on our lips, he still is going to listen to us. That's love, right? Aren't there people sometimes, man, you already told me that. Dad, you tell me that story like 20 times. Or whatever, I don't know. I mean, just whatever it is. But God doesn't care. He wants to hear from us. John chapter 11, we've got a scenario where Jesus is about to resurrect his friend. And in John chapter 11, Jesus says something interesting in his prayer, knowing that people are listening to him. So watch what he says. Go to verse 41. So they took away the stone. I'll wait for you. I heard some pages turn. So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me. He is saying in his prayer, he's thanking God that he's heard him. He heard Jesus. Even though he says, I know you always hear me. And he's saying it because of the people around. His prayer was somewhat educational in this aspect. And so I want to say, not only does God show us that he listens to us, not only does he teach us that in songs from the Old Testament and other passages, but even here, Jesus is trying to show us that God wants to hear us. He wants to listen to us. That is the nature of our God. That is the nature of the God we serve. So now I want to take you back to a time in my life when I was a 15-year-old high school student, and I was in my health class. And I was socially awkward, very socially awkward, didn't have a lot of friends, and had gotten made fun of a lot growing up. And my teacher had us answer these questions. And we went, like you do sometimes in school, the first person in the first row answered question number 1. The second person answered question number 2. So I was in that first row, or first column, whatever you say. And then some teachers would call it row, some would call it, it's really a column, whatever. So the girl next to me answered this question. Her name was Tori, and she answered this question. The question was either I am good at or I am a good blank. And she said, I am a good listener. So the health teacher stopped the class, and I listened to this dude because he was a former Mr. Minnesota bodybuilder, and I was an athlete, and so he used to coach me in the weight room, and I was, whatever this guy said, I would listen to. Like he was divorced, for example, and he would talk about his kids coming over to stay with him on the weekends, because he was talking about, he was a health teacher, teaching us about healthy food, but he was talking about how when his kids came over, they would make chocolate chip cookies and eat all the cookies. And I was like, I like this guy. Chocolate chip cookies. He said, it's not going to kill him. And we drink a glass of milk with it, too. And he was, anyway, that's what he said. So I was like, I can eat chocolate chip cookies and eat all of them. Anyway, so he stopped the class. So I was listening, and he said, if you are a good listener, you will never run out of friends. I thought, what? And he said it again. And he was talking about how everybody needs someone to talk to, and he was saying this stuff. So I was a mess emotionally. I had a lot of family problems and stuff. So I thought, I'm going to try this. So I was like, I went for weeks thinking about who can I listen to. I would try to talk to people. Like I was around some guys, and let me just tell you, 15-year-old guys and 16-year-old guys are not really into like you trying to listen to them. I'm just. So anyway, so I thought, what should I do? I really was baffled. I couldn't think of who to listen to. So I thought, I used to live next door to this girl named Lisa, and she and her brother were both adopted, and they were in my grade. So they both were, so they were kind of like my friends. And so I was over there for one summer after 9th grade. The previous summer, I was always over there, and we watched like the same movie over and over and over again. So I thought I had her number, so I called her one night. I said, I'm going to call Lisa. So I called Lisa, and I had no plan. I was like, I'm just going to call her and try to listen. And I called her, and she said, hello. I said, oh, hey, it's me, Frederic. And she's like, oh, hey, what's going on? I was like, oh, nothing. What are you doing? She's like, oh, nothing. She's like, what's up? I said, what do you mean? And she's like, well, why'd you call me? I was like, gulp. I didn't know what to say. I had no plan. I was just like, I'm going to call Lisa. So I thought, I was panicked, and I didn't know what to say. So I said the first thing that came to my mind. She said, why'd you call me? And I was like, so hey, do you like anybody? That's the first thing I thought of to say. And she said, she started talking about this guy named Jason, and I was like, whew. And she like really kept talking and talking. So I was just trying to listen. I was like this. We talked for like an hour and a half. I mean, for me, I was very socially awkward. So like halfway through, I was like, I'm talking to a girl. I'm so excited. And we finished the conversation after about an hour and a half. And she said, this was fun. Why don't you call me tomorrow? I said, okay. And so I call her. So we just kept doing that like 3-4 times a week. I was talking to her for 1.5 to 2 hours at least a night. And after a while, so I started learning a little bit about her. I learned, wow, she really has a lot of insecurities when it comes to this guy, Jason. And she really is nervous about competing in track and whether she's going to really be good against this other girl that she thinks might be good. And she's nervous about that. She's insecure about how she looks. She's talking to me about certain outfits and parts of her body that she thinks don't look good. And she's telling me all this stuff. And I was like, wow, I never knew she had all these worries. Then after a while, you know what started happening to me? I started liking Lisa. And that was weird because, you know, we went on for weeks like this. And I was not like the most mature 15-year-old. Was not from a Christian family, so I would do things that weren't very nice. I would just take the phone, because sometimes I was shocked at how much she would talk to me, and without me saying a word. And so I would sometimes just take the phone and just put it like this for a long time. And I'm like, she's still talking. So it was just interesting. But one day, I literally felt like I heard her do this. Like she exhaled, like she talked herself out. This is maybe a few weeks later. And then, I promise you, she said this to me: we never talk about you. Do you like anybody? And by then, I was already liking Lisa, because I'm talking to her all the time. And but I couldn't tell her, so I was just made up something, and I told her some other girl. Next thing you know, I talked for like 2 or 3 minutes, then she started talking again, and I was like, man. So we kept talking. Let me tell you something. I did try to do that. I got better. I was like really learning how to ask questions. It was like a laboratory almost, but I got really good, and I started listening to people. I'm telling you something. It blew me away how from that time, I continue to marvel at how from that time on in my life, my friends have grown exponentially. Exponentially. And this does affect the Bible studies I get into. I can talk more about that, but let me tell you, I have more Bible studies than I can handle. I can study with people, I have too many people. And they don't quit, because I talk to people and I make friends with them and I listen to them and we talk, and I'm just trying to be their friend, as well as share the love of God and the knowledge of God with them. And so there's power. And I started learning all kinds of things. And I did this in like my non-Christian high school. I went to a college where there were a lot of Christians, and it was the same thing. And I learned a lot. And as I teach college students now, I learned that generationally, there's like not a lot of change in the insecurities of girls. There's not a lot of change in the insecurities of guys, and the lack of willingness for a lot of guys to get deep in conversations. That was a little awkward for me, but because I started hearing guys talking about their girlfriends in the locker room, and she would say things like, "Oh, I think he really means it now. He said he's sorry. I think it's going to be different." And he's talking about her like she's dumb. And that made me angry, really angry. Because I was hearing these girls like really care, and it was just not, it made me really look at the world differently, and it really affected me. So what am I trying to get at? I'm going to tell you the inside and outside, the internal and external realities of being a good listener, a spiritually affectionate listener. And that means there's things we're doing on the inside, things we're doing externally. Do's and don'ts. I'm going to give you a few of them. I have so many more. This has been my obsession since before I became a Christian. How to listen in a way where people really know that you love them, but you can encourage them as well and let them know. I mean, quite frankly, don't people pay big money to people just to be able to talk to somebody who will listen to them in an understanding and compassionate way? Again, what if we all could kind of get rid of the cultural selfish ambition, and we all could become proactive, spiritually affectionate listeners with each other? You better believe things would change overnight. So, let me talk to you about a couple of these things, and I'll give you some Bible verses to help back up these principles. The first number one thing, and this is weird because I didn't really ever start talking about this until 2015. I was at a men's retreat in Ohio. And there were a bunch of guys there, and I was trying to talk about listening. And then on a whim, they kept asking questions, so on a whim, I was like, hey, do you want me to give you a demonstration? So they asked me, they said, yeah. So I said, I need somebody who's willing to talk. It was all men, too. So this is like these are different than like the 15-year-old boys. Like these guys have been through some things. So I said, I need somebody who's willing to talk about some problem or painful thing in their life, willing to be honest, and just willing to give it a chance and be transparent. So I started talking to him, and I just really got into it. And some of the things, I was nervous. I was like wanting the people, please don't say anything, guys. I was nervous a couple times they might say something because there were long periods of silence sometimes. And I'll explain that in a moment. But I'll tell you what happened. I did what I did best and just listened to him. And I'll tell you what happened. I said, I'm going to go out on a limb, guys. And I said, I just met this dude tonight. I don't know him. Most of you, except for a couple of you, I don't know. So this was not planned. I said, I'm just going on a limb. I said, dude, you cannot lie to me because of what you think I'm wanting to hear. You have to tell me the truth. So I said, maybe his name was Chris, I think. I said, Chris, when I was talking to you, did you feel like I loved you? Did you feel loved? He said, yes. So I said, I don't know what made me ask this question, but I said, I'm going to go on a limb again. I said, Chris, answer this question, but you have to be honest. Have you ever felt as loved as you did when I was talking to you with anybody else any other time in your life? Has any other conversation, have you ever felt as loved as you did right now when I was talking to you? He said, no. And I just met him. I'm trying to underscore to you, when we learn from God the way he listens and these principles he tells us on how to think and how to act, that's the kind of impact we can have on people. And that's what everybody needs. It's not good for man to be alone. That was before there was any sin, God made that observation. So with that, I'm going to tell you these principles. The first thing, absolutely, you must never do, or must do, is you must shut your mouth. You cannot interrupt the other person. You must be quiet. Let me tell you what's going to happen. What I've learned from experience is going to happen. So you stay quiet. You're like, quiet, don't talk, because you're going to want to talk. Here's what's going to happen. Mark my words. You'll be in a conversation with somebody, you're trying to listen to them. They'll talk for a little bit, and they will stop. And when they stop, you are going to feel everything inside of you that wants to speak. You want to know why? Because that's about how long we have been socially trained that it's socially acceptable for somebody to talk. Don't say a word. Don't say a word. You have to train them to trust you and realize that you are different and you are going to love them in a way nobody else has. So that's moving in the direction of how God listens to us and loves us. So you don't interrupt. Stay quiet. Most people, in my experience, will spend 2-3 times there might be some awkward moments. But they might not even understand what's going on, but they will be so captivated by the fact that you are just listening to them that they will just go on. And if it's like me, if you're like me, you'll notice, man, they acted like that was the end of the story. But now they're going into all these new details. And if you have any sense of curiosity about you or servant heart at all, you want to really dig there and you realize, wow, this is obviously weighing on this person. So that's the one thing you do. You don't interrupt, you stay quiet. That's externally. You have to not talk. Internally, what you must do is you must love that person. So here's the thing. There's an inner monologue everybody goes through. There's things we say, but everybody has an inner monologue. Those are the things you're thinking about when life is happening. You hear a speaker, you're like, man, when is it going to be over? Or you hear a speaker like, man, where have you been all my life? Or whatever. You hear speakers and you're like, wow, that's really, his PowerPoint's, I mean, whatever it is. He's like, I love his tie. There's all kinds of things we think about when, oh, don't you like my tie? No, I'm just kidding. But there's all kinds of things we think about. That's inner monologue. Well, I want to, just for sake of time, let me read something to you. There is this amazing concept that, for sake of time, I'm not going to read it yet, but Philippians 4, verse 8 tells us that whatever we think about, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is right, read that verse and apply it to people. Whatever is honorable about this person, whatever is right about this person. And I want you to think about how you love them. So Jesus in Matthew 7:12, when he says how you want people to treat you is how you should treat other people, that doesn't mean if you like chocolate chip cookies, you make people chocolate chip cookies. What it means is, because what if somebody brings you like some cereal you can't stand? And they think, well, I like that, so I thought you'd like that. I mean, haven't we had people do that to us? I like this, so I want to give it to you. Now, sometimes you appreciate it, but sometimes it's something you don't even like. And wouldn't it be nice if people asked? So that's the principle. Don't do what you like. Treat them the way you want to be treated. But it necessarily means you're going to put yourself in their shoes and wonder what they want, what they would like to have happen in their life. So you've got to, in your mind, visualize what they're going through, who they are, what their needs are. So what I suggest is your thought process and your inner monologue must be to this person, wow, I love you so much. Or, wow, I can't imagine all the things you've been through. You must be so strong. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. You don't say it out loud. You say it in your brain while you're looking at them in the eye. And let me tell you something. They will feel it. They'll feel it. They may not know what it is they're feeling, but they'll feel it. So you inner monologue. You think about how much you love somebody, and you feel compassionate thoughts toward them about what they're going through and how strong they are and what great things God must have in store for them to help get them through these scenarios. So then, another inner thing that you have to do is you have to deny yourself. So there's a number of verses from Romans 12. I'm going to read one in a moment. There's a passage in Romans 12, again here in Philippians 2 that I'm going to read. Turn to Philippians 2 right now. But they talk about treating people as if they're more important than you, essentially. Luke 17, verses 7 through 10, tell one of my favorite stories, which, by the way, is a guarantee for happiness. It talks about how when the servant comes in, you don't say, oh, sit down. The servant has to finish his job, and then it really just talks about the mindset of a servant. And what I want to suggest, that's exactly what Jesus was like. There's a messianic psalm, Psalm 22. Verse 6, it's all about Jesus. And verse 6 of Psalm 22 says, I am a worm and not a man. So I like to think about just beginning to understand what it's like to be God and then live in our flesh. So I think about what it would be like for me in my brain and everything I know I can do and then I go inside the body of a worm. So I want you to think about the fact that you are there to serve as a servant, and that is a glory to God. You are there to treat somebody as if they're more important than you and to treat them with honor and respect and dignity. And so that means you don't worry about what you can say. You worry about loving them and serving them. So that's the other thing we do internally. Externally, in addition to not saying anything, I want to suggest that if you say anything, it's only to help show your compassion or your love for them. Acknowledging how hard something is never a bad thing. Acknowledging how God must have something special for somebody because of the way they've gotten them through this scenario. Acknowledging God must want you to be really strong to face something else or help other people in your circumstances. but you don't really want to talk a lot. You want to just keep it zipped. And you want to really just ask questions. You know, Jesus asked questions. Matthew 10, he asked the guys who are blind, what do you want me to do for you? And they told him. John chapter 1, he has disciples on the verge of being his disciples and says, what do you want? Where are you going? What do you want? They tell him, and then he tells them, come and see, come follow me. Questions are good. You want to ask questions to help understand what somebody is going through. If they tell you details, ask them questions. What was that like? Here are great questions. And when I tell you these questions I learned to ask, you'll realize I learned to ask these questions with girls and not with guys, because it didn't fly with a lot of guys. When I ask things like, how did that make you feel? I can't even repeat the things some of my male friends told me when I would say that kind of stuff to them. You ask them, how did that make you feel? And you just keep asking questions. They tell you things. Wait, tell me more about that. What was that like? Because people just gloss over stuff because we've been trained, nobody wants to listen to us. That's how we've been trained. We have to be willing to ask questions and take some time to really dig in. And let me tell you, this is not manipulation. This is putting yourself in somebody's shoes so you can better treat them with honor if they're more important than you, or in the spirit of Matthew 7:12, the golden rule, treating people as you want to be treated. Learning about people from them. Let me tell you what many really good-hearted Christians do that I think is a big mistake. It's not always a mistake, but I'll tell you what I mean, and then if it ever happens, please don't just indulge it. Just try to minimize it. We got to our congregation, and somebody came over to our house and wanted to tell us about everybody in the church. This was not a gossiper. This was somebody who really wanted us to understand the history and the dynamic and all this stuff. But you know what it did? I had a natural curiosity about everybody. And once I knew about people, I noticed it deflated my natural curiosity. And I didn't feel the same desire to ask questions like, tell me about you. Tell me about your life. What do you like? Why is your husband so awesome? Why is your wife so amazing? How'd you guys meet? Why are your kids so awesome? Whatever. And I didn't feel the same need to ask those questions. I was self-aware enough that I still made myself go through the process, but I didn't do it as much as I would have normally because I knew these things. And I felt weird asking questions that I kind of knew the answers to anyway. I was like, that's weird. Like, I'm telling you, when you know who this person is, she's one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. Another person came to our congregation, and a woman came to me with her husband and said, hey, what's her story? Like, what's her background? What's her life like? So I believe what I believe. I just told you. So what I told her, and I said, I'm not trying to be rude at all, but I really think it's probably better if you just ask her. And that was my effort to not keep the cycle going of what happened with me. And a lot of Christians, you guys know what I'm talking about. I've been on the block. Somebody here has seen exactly what I'm talking about. I really believe when we do that, to some degree, not all the time and in every way I'm not making an absolute statement, but can you see if everyone did that, how that can decrease the natural curiosity that fuels relationships? That's exactly why I've never been a fan of mailboxes in the church building, because I don't need another reason to not talk to somebody. I feel like if I want to give something to somebody, I want to see him in person and have some contact, and that just is good. And so not judging anybody if you have mailboxes in the building, I just wouldn't use them. You know what I mean? So I share these things with you. There's so many things we can say. I want to read a couple passages to you. Go with me to Philippians chapter 2. You're already there probably. I want you to begin reading in verse 3. And I want you to think about this in the context of communication, listening to people, and I want you to think about Jesus. And as you read the Gospels, pay attention to the way Jesus listened to people. Pay attention to the questions he asked. Pay attention to the people he was with that probably had nobody to talk to. You think children were respected the way they are today in the first century? No. And he wanted them to come to him. You think the prostitutes and sinners and tax collectors and all those people were respected in that day? He gave them time. I am not trying to say something that's not in the Bible, but I do suggest knowing the nature of God and that Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, that he gave them a spiritually affectionate ear, just like God always has, in an encouraging way. So think about this from a listening standpoint. Philippians 2, verse 3. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit in your conversations, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves when you're talking to them. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. Ask questions. Find out their interests, their needs. And here it is with Jesus. Have this attitude in yourself, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the form of a bondservant, and being made in his likeness of men, in the likeness of men, being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. For this reason also, God highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name which is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee would bow, of those who are in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and that every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. You know, I spoke about marriage last night, told you I have a ton of stuff I can say. I want you to know what I'm going to say here. I take this passage and kind of appropriate it for a human relationship. I'm going to give you an example as a wife, but you also do it with your friends. And if you do this, this really gets your mind in the right frame of mind. I'm telling you, it gets your heart in the right spot. I don't do it every day, but it's like I try to. But sometimes you wake up late and you're like, man, you're rushing and you're distracted. But every day I really try to do this in my head. I'll say, even though, and I kind of appropriate the word, so I'm not trying to be blasphemous, but this is how I think. I want to be like Jesus. I'll say, even though I exist in the same form as my wife, I don't regard equality with my wife a thing to be grasped. So I will empty myself as a servant. And when we think that way about people, and we're thinking to somebody who's talking to us, man, I love you so much. And even though we're both humans, I don't even regard equality with you a thing to be grasped. I'm so honored even to be hearing you tell me these things. Like, do you realize what an honor it is for somebody to talk to you and share things about their life? And do you realize how difficult it is to do that, for you to feel like you can trust somebody with your problems? I've trained and learned from a lot of preachers. And there was one preacher I had a lot of conflict with. Because even as a young guy, I believed this stuff. Remember, I've been doing this stuff since I was 15, before I was a Christian. And people would have problems or want to talk to me about something, and I would drop everything to talk to them. And the guy I was training with didn't like it. He's like, you have work to do, this and this and this. And I would tell him sometimes, you told me when I came here, you wanted me to be encouraging to the people. And I would say, I don't believe you can put a time frame or a clock or a schedule on people and their needs. If they come to me today, that means they might not come to me tomorrow. So I drop everything. And you know who I learned that from? Jesus. The story about Jesus that has impacted my life the most is what happened when John the Baptist died. When John the Baptist died, Jesus needed to be alone. He wouldn't have gone to be by himself if he didn't need to be by himself. But the people followed him. So what did he do? He stopped meeting his own needs to commune with God or whatever he was going to do, and he met the needs of the people. Because that was when they came to him. He met their needs. And then when everyone's getting hungry and they have physical needs, and you compare the gospel accounts, it's in all four, his friends said, you got to send these people away. They're hungry. They need food. He says, no, we're going to meet their spiritual needs too. And even though he didn't need somebody's bread and fish to do it, he's including them in the work. That's what God does. He's doing all the work, but he wants us to do it with him. So we have to listen to people just like God does. And so that's not even the end of it. We're going to meet their physical needs too. People were filled. They go on their way. He sends his good friends away. You can do that with your buddies. He goes off again alone. But there's a big storm, and he ends up walking on the water. Peter falls in. He comforts them. And there's even in John identified what I would perceive to be a miracle, where immediately the boat is at the other side of the lake. And Jesus is gone again. And then he's off by himself. Remember, this whole deal started when he tried to be alone after this horrible thing happened with John the Baptist being killed. Next thing you know, everybody's like, Jesus, 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 bread, 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 bread. There were prophecies about the Messiah King providing food and wine. And then he shows up again to meet their spiritual needs. They're thronging. And he says, you guys are just here because you want the bread. And he said, uh-huh. And he said, I'm the bread of life. He talked about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. And one of the saddest verses ever, and it's easy to remember because it's John 6, verse 66. 666. A lot of people just left him. So he stopped meeting his own needs to meet the needs of people and give them what they needed, the truth, and they left. A lot of them left. I learned that from Jesus. And I believe, just like with Jesus, it is my responsibility as a man of God to pray when I can and to make sure I have the energy reserves spiritually, psychologically, energetically, in every way to be there for people when the needs arise, because I cannot predict when they're going to happen. Sometimes I'm weak. Sometimes you got more than one, and you're like, I really can't do this. I'm sorry, but I really want to talk to you. You do what you can. I encourage everybody here to embrace that servant's heart like Jesus. I encourage you to only say words that are edifying, as we are taught at the end of Ephesians 4. Focus on building people up. Focus on listening to their needs and not just hearing a soundbite. If you say, I really don't have time to listen to you, can we set a time? But you give them a few minutes first or something. Do whatever you can do. And let me tell you, every time they stop, please hear me on this. Every single time they stop talking, every single time, there's always more. There is always more. Always. That's not time to run because we're missing our favorite show. That's time when we say, wow, God, I can't even believe I'm the person you've chosen to be here providentially for this person to talk to. And I'm so thankful they're talking to me. Help me honor them and help me honor you. Because I love you, God, and I love them so much. And I know you love them more than I love them. So please help me to love them through my spiritually affectionate listening. Guys, we can change the world. And we can help show people and touch their hearts with the love of God by not saying a word. And quite frankly, when it comes to communication and interacting with people, most people focus on what they have to say. People even try learning little tricks and gimmicks and phrases and what do I say? Let me tell you something. Before I started preaching, I did very well in sales. And you want to know how I did well in sales? Not because I was smooth with words, because I did what I've always done. I listened to people, found out what they needed, and I really tried to help them. Even if it meant I was connecting them with another company to make sure they didn't make a bad choice, I was giving them advice on different other companies. Guys, I've never been short on friends ever since I was 15 years old. Ever. Because I learned how to listen. And when I became a Christian, I really learned how to listen with spiritual affection, just like Jesus. I'm trying, and I still am learning and still am growing, and there's so much more I can say. Let me give you one other tip. If you really want to understand the mindset of how to think about people and interact with people and how to talk to people, some people say my best sermon ever is a sermon called The Gideon Factor. Look up Frederic Gray, The Gideon Factor online, and just listen to it, and you'll see how I think, even in more detail. And I really encourage you to embrace that mindset, the Gideon Factor, based on Gideon in the Bible. And with that, I just want to say, from the bottom of my heart, I'm so thankful to be here. I really, really am. I got to shave a goat today. I never did that before in my life. I held a chicken for the first time. Ate a really good lunch. Ate a really good dinner. You guys are very good to me. If there's anything I can ever do for any of you, I want you to let me know. I'll do my best if I can. And if not, I'll try to refer you to somebody who can help you better than me. And even though there's people here I've never met, most people here I have met, it's true. I can say I love you. I really can. I love you guys so much. Even though we don't have a lot of history, I do love you. I really do. And of course, you love me too. Of course. No, I'm just kidding. But I do. So I'm in this deal to save souls. And if there's anybody here who needs any help at all with anything, if you need help being saved or anything at all, please come forward while we stand and sing the song.